Hi, and welcome to Global Student Voices, the podcast that brings you exciting stories and invaluable insights from students, educators, and thought leaders around the world. I'm your host, Coach Martin, with 30 years of experience in international education. Join us each time when we navigate the exciting journey between international secondary school and university. Let's get started. All right, and I'm so excited to welcome Aparna Patrie. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I'm happy to be here.
Well, I'm so glad you're here. When I initially started thinking about having you on the show, I had all this idea of how useful it would be to have an immigration attorney on the show to share with students, and because sometimes things happen and you just need a consult, and I thought, well, an attorney would be great for people just to have that connection with. I had no idea that the world would change so dramatically in the ensuing days and months. Your timing on here is more than timely. I'm glad to have you here. I hope that we can address a couple of things that maybe some former global students, maybe some current students are concerned about. I've been getting a ton of messages from potential students who've been accepted to college, university, just saying, should I come? Should I not come? So it's a time for those of us who are interconnected, interwoven with immigration and that field. This is a challenging, I'll go ahead and say troubling time.
That's fair, I think.
So thank you. I'm sure you're very, very busy with all this. And I'm so grateful that you've taken the time to be on the show. For people that are tuning in, we got to get to know you a little bit. People don't know, they may not know that this is a big interview for me. I haven't, not been on the air a whole year yet. I've had some what I thought were some pretty impressive guests, but I've never had anyone that I previously have seen on C-SPAN whispering into a senator's ear, former Department of Justice attorney and civil rights. That's a big deal. Thank you for your service. Thank you for serving our country in the way you have. I really appreciate it. Those are, in my mind, it's kind of like teachers, nurses, people in full-time ministry, people who serve the government out of altruism. The way you've come at it as a way to serve your fellow humans is remarkable, and I'm very grateful.
That's such a kind introduction. Thank you. I really, really appreciate that. And it is a troubling time. It is a scary time. So I'm excited to answer whatever questions you might have and talk about it. I should say that whatever I say in this interview that kind of explains, legal questions, it's not intended to be legal advice. And anyone who is listening in who has a specific legal question about their own situation should consult a lawyer. I'm happy to kind of talk in generalities about generally what people can expect and what people should consider doing.
Yeah, there's so much nuance to everybody's specific situation. You can't say, oh, you came on this kind of visa, so this is your situation. There's nothing, I'm not even sure. It was complex before, and I'm not sure that the rules seem to be being rewritten as we speak, so I'm sure it changes almost every day. But in general, kind of broad stroke, you like me, have spent some time in Indonesia, international school background. My international school was in Kenya, but yours in Indonesia. If one of your classmates, a younger sibling, coming out of a situation like that and looking at the U.S.'s school, potentially coming in as a freshman next year, do you have any general, this wouldn't be legal advice, this is just kind of feeling advice for them?
Absolutely. The biggest thing I'll say right now is that there's a lot of things that are being thrown at the public in terms of the executive orders and what you're seeing on the news and all these changes and reports of mass deportations and all of that. But you have to remember that, a lot of that I think is designed to give people pause and scare people and put them on their back foot. And one of the most powerful things you can do is stay calm and remember that, you know, these things are going to play out in the courts. Several of the orders that have come out so far are go outside the bounds of what a president can do. One of them's already been struck down by a court in Seattle, and there's a nationwide stay on it. I'm referring to the birthright citizenship order. And while it's tempting to be in a posture to kind of like change plans and panic, I just want to urge everybody to just kind of take a deep breath and remember that, this isn't over yet. And there are two sides to this. And there are a lot of really passionate people working on the other side to push back and stop a lot of what's happening. That said, for folks who are looking to come here on a student visa, I actually think, as long as a person has a valid visa, there's no reason to be worried.
Yeah.
You've got a valid visa with an expiration date. You're coming here to study. That is not what a lot of these efforts are being targeted towards, and they're just not enough. For example, ICE agents. I tell this to people all the time. They're just not enough CBP agents and ICE agents and other folks that can enforce some of the goals of these orders and these goals, and so everyone just needs to take a deep breath and calm down and remember that there are a lot of people out there really fighting for you and fighting for the right to immigrate and fighting for the right to stay in this country. And that's it's going to take many months and years for some of those things to.
Yeah, I think that's a good word. I think my comment to folks have been this is a divided country in this sense on this issue. And the good folks who are fighting for many of these issues are actually at the universities that you've applied to and got accepted to. So not only are you not in any legal jeopardy, there's not a risk in coming, but even the kind of hostile immigration rhetoric is not something that I'm actually seeing at the universities playing out. So.
Yeah. And that's good. I think, universities tend to be forums where people are a lot more welcoming and open to a diversity of ideas than a lot of other forums. I also think it's really important for American students to be exposed and learn together with students from other countries. I think it's really helpful, not just for the students from other countries, but for American students too. And so, I don't want anyone to not come because of any fear that has come out of, some of the recent events. And just remember that you're doing this country a service too by coming here and educating people about where you're from, and I think that's important to remember.
When you think back to some of the origins of the student visa and the fact that it has its own category, it really goes back to a push for world peace. It was an intentional effort to bring the world closer together and have shared experiences. And it's proven to be very effective. When you look at the number of world leaders who have educated themselves side by side with people from other countries, whether they're U.S. American leaders who've studied abroad and done Fulbright scholarships and those kind of things, or the many, many world leaders that have studied in the U.S., there's no doubt that the world is a safer and better place because we've learned together.
Absolutely.
I'm encouraged to hear other people outside of my own. We kind of talk to ourselves a lot, and it's good to hear people from the outside saying this is a good thing to continue doing. Any caution for students kind of in this kind of heated time? Anything, a word of caution or a word of just good advice for students around immigration?
Yeah, sure. I would say the one risk and thing that students should think about is the fact that, like you said earlier, the country is really divided on this issue. It's really heated on both sides. And a lot of times issues of immigration and race kind of come together. And so, I really hope this isn't the case, but there is concern that there are, private parties that might be going out there and trying to find folks who are here illegally and just assume that just because of the color of your skin or what you look like, that you might fall into that category and sort of take it upon themselves to be the law, so to speak. I just want everybody to remember that that is not legal. And, people can't do that. And regardless of your immigration status, if you are in this country, you have certain constitutional rights. It doesn't matter if you're a citizen. It doesn't matter if you're illegal or, a legal immigrant or an immigrant without papers. You have certain rights. You have the right to protest. You have First Amendment rights to speak out. You have the right to refuse searches without a warrant. You have several rights. And so I just want to make sure people understand that they have these rights that they can assert if anything like that does happen, and to report such, activities to the police if you're ever under any kind of physical threat.
That's fantastic. In the number of years that I've been working with students and working with universities across the country, we certainly have had, during different phases, we've certainly have had, like you said, individual actors who have behaved badly. And I know there's there's already fear is already pulling out on the part of our brain that makes good decisions. And so having that constant voice, and if you're listening in, have Aparna's voice saying that's not legal, and you can get you can seek legal recourse. You can contact the authorities and get the help you need. You don't need to take it onto yourself. You don't need to just be fearful that you're going to have to run and hide. And it's not, I think for college, it's not something that university security is going to tolerate either.
Exactly.
Those are typically those bad actors. If they happen to be around your campus and looking to cause trouble, your campus security is going to want to put that to an end. They don't have the right to be there at all. They're not students, and so therefore you will find good reception among your campus security police.
That's exactly right. Yeah.
So tell me a little bit about your practice and kind of ways that um, you think people can reach out, connect to attorneys like yourself. One of the things I want to say, because I didn't know this until we talked before, is you can actually, with immigration law, you can actually practice. Not only people who are in Hawaii with you can call you, but people from outside Hawaii can actually reach out to you and get help from you. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And that's kind of, there are lots of different ways I found myself opening this practice. It's kind of a long story, but I've been living in Hawaii for 4 years. My husband and I moved out here during the COVID pandemic. We'd always tried to figure out, how can we move out here? This is like our favorite place in the world. We've been coming here every year for so many years. We got married here. And so we've always wondered that, but never could really figure out how to make it work. During COVID, we came out here for what we thought would just be 8 weeks. And 4 years later, we're still here. And I quickly realized that I wanted to really embed myself in the community here and, not be someone who's just kind of working remotely for a mainland institution. We call it mainland here,
Yeah.
call it the continent, But I really wanted to embed myself in the community here. I was looking for opportunities, and it occurred to me, what if I just opened my own practice? And it was a very scary thought at first. I've never done anything like that before. I've always kind of worked for bigger institutions and just been an employee, and to take the risk of opening your own practice that could fail. And, it was quite scary. But being an immigrant myself and having done a little bit of immigration law in the past, I looked into it a little bit. And immigration law is the only kind of law in the country where you don't have to be barred in the state where you're residing to practice it. It is only federal. Immigration law is not in state courts. It's only in federal court. So that means that I can take cases from people all over the country and even outside the country. I have a client in Sweden, for example. I've got some clients in California. I'm talking to someone in Arizona. I've talked to someone in South Carolina. And so I can really kind of take cases from anywhere. And because immigration courts, have modernized so much, you can do hearings over Zoom. So if you have to appear in court, you can appear over Zoom if you need to. And, so much of practicing law is filings. You have to file briefs and things like that. And that happens online now. And so I decided to open this practice. I also figured out that there was only one other immigration attorney on the entire island, whereas in Lahaina alone, which is the west side of Maui where I live, 30% of the residents here are foreign born. So the need for immigration services is really, really high in Hawaii, and in Maui in particular. And there was only one other immigration attorney on island. And so I connected with him, and he's been mentoring me. He's been really wonderful. He's very involved with, a lot of nonprofit work. And so that's kind of how I got my start. I do a lot of different things. Right now, a lot of my caseload is asylum cases, temporary protected status, removal defense. So folks who are in removal proceedings and need a lawyer in court. I've done an appeal. I've done a few appeals. I've done several adjustments of status, DACA renewals, U visas, violence against women visas. It kind of runs the gamut. And I have talked to a couple of folks who are interested in investor visas. And so I'm trying to, look into that as well. But the practice is pretty young. It's less than a year old, but it's been really wonderful to be able to give back to the community in this way and meet everyone I've met. And immigration law is super complicated and super interesting. And, I'm just really grateful that I get to do this work. It's a lot of fun.
Well, that's great. When I was hearing you talking about and got to watch both you and your husband going through the fires last year and the way that you guys not only were resilient in the face of tragedy, but also how you guys poured out into the community. Your Facebook posts about, making sure people were getting to school and access to to resources and access to whatever they needed. Do you think, and this is kind of that TCK experience or that cross-cultural life experience. Do you think that some of that, your life having lived in different countries, being an immigrant yourself, does that make you more sensitive to community and the value and how important community is? There certainly are people, I'm sure, in your community who didn't grow up there and who are outsiders. They can be there a long time and are still outsiders. But I think that your family is part of the community, even in just the 4 years. And you think that's cultural upbringing? Is that just personal choice? Where does that come from?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's interesting because I moved around a lot growing up. I was born in India. We left when I was 3 years old. We went to Indonesia where we were expats, and I was there until I was, age 13. And even within Indonesia, we moved from a smaller town at the time, Semarang, to Jakarta, the capital city. So, even had to move there. And then we moved to South Carolina from Jakarta when I was 13 years old. So I've moved around a lot and been forced to make community wherever I go and make friends quickly and connect to people and kind of know intuitively who my people are and who, I think that that's one thing it's really helped me with, in addition to just being resilient and being okay with change and being able to adapt. My husband grew up in the same hometown his entire life. So he has had the opposite experience, but in that hometown, community is incredibly strong, as you know. And so he's also come from a place where everybody helps each other out. It's very community focused. It's very strong in that sense. So, and Hawaii is really complicated in that there have been waves of immigration to this place over many, many generations. Um, there's so many folks from different parts of the world here. There's a Filipino population, there's a Japanese population, there's a big Latino population now, and folks from other Pacific islands like the Marshallese, Tongan, etc. And those waves of immigration, folks have come at different times and have different have to, are seen as the idea of like community and belonging here is really interesting and different from a lot of places I've been to because of those waves of immigration. And so, yes, we do feel like we are part of the community, but we also recognize that we're also, this is not, we're here as guests in a lot of ways, and it's our obligation to give back however we can because we're taking so much good from this place. And so that's been part of how we've tried at least to approach being here.
Well, that's you couldn't have explained that more succinctly what I would advise folks who are living cross culturally to do. That idea of belonging to community without feeling entitled to it. Like
Yes.
this can be my community without feeling like, yeah, that whole entitled toxic nonsense that we've all observed. And that what a refreshing difference it is when people pour into community, give back community because they recognize what they're getting from it. And I think that's the difference between, expats that have good positive impact and experience across living in other countries. They tend to be people who have a lot of respect for the communities they're living in, are willing to pour in, but not that they appreciate what they get back, whatever it is, but they don't feel like they're owed anything. They recognize that it's not their birthright, and I think that's a really interesting difference. And I think you guys are living that out really well. So it's beautiful. It's
And
beautiful.
we're trying our best.
Yeah, and because it's a pretty diverse community, as parents raising kids from mixed backgrounds, feel like this is a just like kind of the perfect place to raise your kids.
Yeah, I mean, we really do for a lot of different reasons. And the kind of mixed race thing is definitely something I've noticed. It's like our middle son, he just looks like a little Hawaiian boy running around with his like sort of blonde hair and darker skin and sun-kissed hair, I guess you should
Yeah.
say. It's like no one really knows what anyone's background is here because you can't really tell most of the time. And that's a really beautiful thing that I've really loved about living here. I also think the fact that they get to be outside and in nature so much is really credible. A lot of Hawaii reminds me of my upbringing in Indonesia, just, small island community, tropical, a lot of aunties and uncles that are regarded as more than just like, a friend of your parents or the parents of your friends, but somebody that's like almost more familiar, part of your family. And a lot of the tropical fruits, a lot of the sort of, when I was growing up, we used to go on these like run hikes with big, big groups of people, mostly from the international school that I grew up in. Parents would organize these like big run hikes and they would happen every weekend. And they would go ahead of time and put little markers that, not the most environmentally friendly thing. I think they've like come up with a better system now,
I'm sure.
and how fun that was. And we do a lot of hikes with our kids now, and it kind of, a lot of it reminds me of my own upbringing, which is why I like, one of the reasons I think I've been so drawn to this place and want that experience for our kids.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of funny, and it seems like every time I talk to somebody on this show, we end up finding cross paths. But we live 7 years just outside of Semarang in Indonesia, which is a small town. I mean, it's a bigger city now, but it is a small town, and certainly are familiar. Your parents were there on business.
My dad was. Yeah.
Yeah. So that business, that Indian business extended expat community, we had a lot of students from that community at the school where we were. And so I'm sure that there were some overlaps along the way. If we dug deep enough, we'd find somebody that we'd shared tea with. So,
Wow. How random. I
right?
didn't even know that. Yeah.
So it's just funny, like, I think of the Indian homes that I was in Semarang, where I was meeting with parents or just hanging out. We'd go into town well, sometimes I just took a bunch of kids from campus down to go see a movie. And then somebody's, who lived there would meet us at the theater. And then oh, my mom wants you to come by. And so we'd go by and have samosas and tea and whatever. And I think, I mean, sometimes these houses stay in the communities and kind of pass from expat to expat. I might have been in Aparna's house. I don't know.
That's true. They do stay. Yeah, that's really funny because they want to have a kind of a database of houses for when the expats come to put them up
Yeah,
places. And so that's you might have been there.
it's
That's true.
possible. It's
It's
possible.
possible.
It's crazy. Hey there, GSV listeners. Before we dive back into our conversation, I wanted to take a moment to thank our incredible guests, the students, school officials, and thought leaders who inspire us with their stories and insights. As you're listening today, be thinking of ways that you can support the guests of this show. There are links in the descriptions with just some of the ways. I'm Coach Martin, your host and your partner in navigating the university journey. Whether you're exploring university options, preparing for admissions, or seeking support during your academic path, my books provide practical guidance and insights to empower your university success. Join me in individual coaching, group sessions, or courses designed to equip you for university life and beyond.
I am from Brazil, but I attended an American school in Indonesia for my secondary education. So my situation was really confusing and really scary. Coach Martin really understands global students, and he loves helping us out.
Again, thank you for listening. Explore the podcast description for links and resources and contacts discussed in today's episode. Visit www.theglobalstudentsolutions.com to learn more and embark on your journey toward university success. Now, let's return to our conversation. Since we were talking about community, you were 13 when you came to the States. Certainly have that. I mean, you didn't come basically as an international student to university because you'd been in the States and had a lot of your developmental years in the US. And so you were bringing that cross-cultural mix to the mix. But you've talked about community here, and I'd want advice for students who are moving into college and are bringing a mix of cultural background. Maybe they've been overseas for a long time, maybe their whole lives. Others have been in and out of, like you, moved around a lot. I think when I got to college, when I moved in my freshman dorm, it was my 22nd move.
My goodness.
So
Wow.
I didn't actually know any permanent place ever, anywhere. So for folks like that, do you have advice just as far as how do you get the most out of your experience, your life, wherever you are?
That's a great question. Yeah, I moved when I was 13, and it was a huge culture shock for me. It was a huge culture shock for the kids who I went to school with. I don't think that a lot of them had met anyone like me before. I was going into eighth grade. It's already such an awkward time. It's such a tough time for people. I had braces. I mean, it was just right. Everybody's already so hormonal, and it was very tough. It was very tough. And I think for and you're right that it wasn't an international student move, but I was an international student in a different way.
Oh,
I think the main difference could be that, I didn't know who I was yet when I moved here. I did a little bit, but I really came into my own in high school
sure.
and realized like who I am and what I want to do and what I care about. That really came from me in high school and in college. Whereas international students coming here in college kind of maybe already know who they are, maybe already kind of have that groundedness to them. And so, I think you're already at an advantage in that sense. But then at the same time, college is challenging enough if you're doing it here in the United States to leave your family and to go live somewhere by yourself is hard enough, and then you add on top of that that you go across the world somewhere and it's a completely new culture and you're by yourself in a completely new culture. I think it's just important to give yourself some grace, and realize that what you're doing is really tough and amazing, and just be kind to yourself, in that process. But, just to stay really true to your own values and don't let anyone, erode those or try to change those. I think that that's really important. I ended up, making a lot of friends in middle school and high school. I think that, it's totally doable, and people eventually kind of, see the good in other people. I mean, I'm a social person, so I just made friends because I'm a really social person. I think if you're shy, you got to find ways and outlets to meet people that have your own interests, that have your same interests. And getting to immerse in another country is a gift. You get this, like, you get to learn all these things about these little things about what it's like to live in a completely different place. And I think, try to look at it that way, that this is an exciting kind of learning experience. I can always go back, but let me just, be a sponge and take everything I can in about this experience and enjoy it, because it's like a gift would be my advice, I think.
I think that's great advice. I think the posture of receiving a gift continuously, I mean, how great is that? Like, you think about the moments you've received gifts and how great it felt to be receiving a gift. If that's your posture in everyday life and you're just getting up in the morning and go, oh, I get to receive more gifts today, how great is that? I think it definitely, and I think you're absolutely right. It does set yourself up. I think there are a variety of ways to sabotage your own psyche as you're engaged in cross-cultural living. There's always going to be things that are uncomfortable, but it's uncomfortable to be the center of attention and receive gifts too, right? I mean, when it's your birthday, that's a weird feeling. If you spend a lot of time dwelling on it, this is awkward. People are all looking at me. But if you keep in mind, hey, but it's great. Hey, everybody's looking at me. That can be really positive. And as I hear people, how two people can have pretty much the same physical experience, but experience it so differently. One of the examples that I talk about a lot is I was attending in an African American church when I was in college, and one of the guys from my floor went with me one Sunday. And he's like, how can you stand it? Everybody's looking at you, and I didn't feel welcome. And I was like, what are you talking about? You were sitting right next to me, and I felt really comfortable, and nobody was staring at us. Like he said, no, there was this lady looking at, so you were looking around until somebody caught your eye, and then you're like, she's staring at me. No, you were looking for somebody looking at you. There's a difference, right? I mean, there's a difference, and you weren't enjoying it. You weren't accepting the gift. You weren't accepting the hospitality of those who were being hospitable. You were looking to feel uncomfortable, and amazingly, you found it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I think that's for a lot of people doing cross-cultural stuff. That's part of the reality. Okay, I can talk about this stuff all day, but I want to talk a little bit more about law stuff.
Yes.
I think that for most, like you said, the students, they come on a visa. The only way to really jeopardize their status is to either not take enough classes and drop below their minimum requirement, which even if they do that, as long as it's not over multiple semesters, there's usually things that can happen. They got to stay in communication with whoever their school representative is. It's one of the unique visa, like it's the most regulated visa status I think there is. Like there's literally somebody on your campus kind of responsible for keeping track of you, right? I mean, there's nothing sneaky about it. Uh, but the other one, the two places where I see people kind of get themselves in a little bit of trouble, and I don't know how big a trouble this is working off campus or working outside of their committed workings, because they can work on campus. The school has committed by accepting students. They've committed to having 20 hours of work available to those students. Sometimes schools forget that was part of their deal, and then they can work more than that during the summers and holidays and things. Going off campus and picking up that extra McDonald's shift is, I think, where places students get in trouble. And then the other places overextending, staying beyond their permitted time, so they get their work authorization to do OPT or CPT after college, and then for whatever reason, that transition from there either to another visa status or, you know, one of the most common things that even students that I was advising experience is that OPT didn't work out. Like they got authorization to work for some setting and then that job didn't work out. They got let go or had to leave because it was a terrible fit or whatever. And then now they're essentially out of status. Any thoughts? I mean, are there other places where like a student might find themselves kind of rubbing up against the law, or in those cases, kind of what's again, you said it correctly, they need to talk to somebody who knows,
Exactly.
because every single situation, even if it's your brother doing what appears to be the same thing you did, it may be totally different in
Maybe
terms of
totally different.
what their action needs to be.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, so much of my practice is just sitting down with folks and them explaining to me their situation. And in my head, I'm issue spotting, right? I'm like, okay, this law is triggered, this law is triggered, and then trying to figure out for that specific person what is the best course of action and then giving them options. But what you said is right. You want to make sure that you're complying with the requirements of your visa. So know what those are. Don't go outside of the rules of your specific visa. Work authorization is a separate thing from the type of work that you're allowed to do while you're on a student visa. Those are separate applications that people can seek out, and it's important not to work outside of your limits of your visa. Visa overstays, on the one hand, they can trigger a bar from re-entering the country. If you overstay your visa for too long, for a certain amount of time, if you have unauthorized presence for a long time, depending on how long, it can really trigger bars to reentry, whether it's, a 5-year bar, permanent bar. So you want to make sure that you're careful about that and you're renewing it or transferring to a different type of visa. So definitely see a lawyer, make sure that you're complying with your visa terms to ensure that you're not getting yourself in trouble. On the other hand, a lot of students who are on visas and then say, and this is true of anyone on a visa, a lot of times people overstay a visa and then they end up getting married to a US citizen and want to adjust their status. You can do that. That is a possibility. You're not prohibited from doing that just because you overstayed a visa. And actually, a lot of my clients are visa overstays that ended up marrying a US citizen and want to adjust their status. But, as immigration law is very complicated when it comes to who can adjust status through marriage and not. And so, if that's a situation that maybe applies to some students, definitely see a lawyer about that, to figure out what your options are.
Yeah, as I've heard many times, usually from Americans about international students, not so much from international students who seem to know better, that, oh, they're probably just going to try to get married and then that way they can stay here forever and all that. But the students that I have worked with who have fallen in love in college, which many people do, and then wanted to get married, it's not that it's not like, oh, well, you're married, great, snap, now you're a citizen. It's not like that. And I don't think anybody in their right mind would say, "Oh, let me get married to stay for the married." I mean, if I think you get married because you're in love and all the other reasons culturally that you may get married. But to do it for visa, it seems like there's easier ways to get a visa change.
Yeah, I mean, it is a really long process. It's hard. It takes a long time. It takes, a couple years sometimes. You have to go do an interview at USCIS. You've got to send in a huge stack of, documents that for a lot of my clients, it takes months for them to even get those things together, and then and also proving the bona fides of the marriage. Like it's not that easy to just get married and apply. You have to show that it's a real marriage. And there's a lot of scrutiny on that actually, and they can question that, ask a lot of questions about it, even for folks who have been married a long time. They've gotten those questions, and so it's not a super easy thing to do by any means. It's a lot of work. It's expensive. The filing fees are expensive. The legal fees tend to be pretty high for those too.
Mhm.
And so it isn't a common thing. And on the other side of things, marriage fraud for visa purposes does happen, and the penalties for that are a maximum of 5 years of jail time. So it's a very serious thing that people should be aware of,
Yeah.
that it's a crime. It's a federal crime to do that. And so, yeah, I urge people to definitely make sure they understand, kind of their legal options before doing anything.
My wife and I, in order to empathize with some friends of ours who one of them was a U.S. citizen, but the other one was not, and they got married. And I said, "Look, let's just see if we could prove our bona fide. Like we've been married at that point, we've been married almost 10 years. Could we go through what they're going through and prove that we were really married and our marriage was real?" And we had our son by then. So our thought was, well, we have a son. Man, I'm not sure we could have done it. Like we had lived apart for work
Yep.
several times, which
Yep.
is a huge red flag.
Huge red flag. Yep.
And so, within a year of when we got married, she moved to North Dakota and lived with my parents for 6 months, and I was still working in Indiana. I think we'd have been in trouble. Certainly early in our marriage, it had been tough to prove. And even by 10 years, now 30 some years into it, I think we could probably pull it off. But
I think so.
still, it would still be challenging to document.
Yeah. Yeah, it's important to remember that it is, there's a lot you have to show, and it's only going to get harder now with the Trump administration. To be totally frank, they're going to question every little thing, and so that it's going to be a much harder process now.
Let's talk a little bit about the new process. One of the things that I observed, and I don't know that it's accurate, it's an internal observation, is it seemed like some of these roles that were then where people were being scrutinized more were also being filled by people who were a little less competent than their predecessors. So when you're getting extra scrutiny on immigration issues and those scrutinizing maybe don't know the laws and know the rules as well, what's the recourse then for the person being scrutinized?
Yeah, unfortunately, I mean, the way it usually works is that when there's a new administration, that administration issues new procedures and protocols for everyone working in the agencies on how to handle things, right? And so in the immigration context for USCIS, it could be something like ask for requests for additional evidence in every single case. So in the past, the policy may have been, if it seems pretty straightforward on first review, go ahead and approve it. But in the new administration, it might be ask for request additional evidence in every single case, no matter what, just to slow things down. So that could be one thing. Another thing is, in some cases, you may be able to move forward without an interview. In the new administration, every single case has to get an interview, right? Like in the previous administration, you could forget to fill out certain boxes in the forms and it be fine. It could be that in the new administration, unless you put NA on every
Every blank
single
spot.
box, they will send it back and say this is incomplete. And so lawyers who have been through their last administration remember a lot of these rules and are able to kind of coach us sort of newer to the practice on what to expect. But there's also going to be other things,
Yeah.
a lot more. And so in terms of recourse, you can always call and report, wrongdoing and things like that to an agency directly. Although now that many of the inspector generals have been fired. I'm not sure what the process would look like for that, but I don't know that that's a great use of anyone's time, to be honest. At the end of the day, when in the immigration context, you are a little bit at the mercy of the officers that are reviewing your case. I mean, what I can say is that since inauguration, I'm still getting I'm getting receipt notices. Things are getting processed, and so it's continuing at the pace it's going right now, and I'm hopeful that will continue. A lot of my cases are at the USCIS field office in Honolulu, and every field office is different. And there are folks who have been doing that job for years and years and years who are just processing things and will continue to, But I think that just making sure that all your applications are perfect. Maybe getting a lawyer is more important now than it's ever been. There are lots of forms you can fill out yourself and send in. And in another world, I might have said, like, you can do this yourself. Like, you don't really need a lawyer for this. But now I think maybe you need somebody to backstop and kind of check everything.
At least do the quick overview. Yeah, kind of the same rules that applied since most of people listening are going to be students, the same rules that applied to your college applications and to your visa application when you went to college. Obviously, every country had different visa offices, and every visa officer was different, and it makes a difference who you get. And you can't really predict for that. All you can do is to access whatever resources you have to check and double check. It's like turning in that application and the essay and just check it as
for the best.
Yep, and hope for the best. And that's exactly right. But I love your advice from the onset to stay calm. Know that there are good people working. You certainly have been one of those good people working behind the scenes to make sure that people are treated well. So thanks for continuing to do that. Last thing I want to talk, you have a new Substack. What kind of things can people find? We'll post it in the description, but what can people find? What will they hear from you on your Substack?
Yeah, thanks for promoting that. Yeah, I just started one on the request of a few different folks. I think I'm going to do my best to try to write articles about what's happening in the immigration system, just changes that are occurring in the new administration, what we can expect, what's happening in the civil rights context to the extent that it's something that I know about, because I also have practiced civil rights in the past. I've been doing some work now on trans rights, and I just joined a board on police misconduct, and I've done police misconduct cases in the past, and so I'll try to do some writing on that. And with the LA wildfires, I've had folks ask me to write some posts on wildfire recovery and just what do you wish you would have known before you went through all of this. So I've written a post on that, and I have some more coming. So that's what I'm hoping for.
Wonderful. Well, people will find the link in it. I hope that you'll just be overwhelmed by the number of people tuning in. Certainly your voice is worth listening to, and we're certainly grateful for the time you've been on here. Folks, it's Patrie Law Associates in Hawaii. Again, we'll have links so that you can find Aparna if you need a good lawyer. This will be the best, and she can refer you if she's just too busy, which we hope will happen. Best of luck to you. Best of luck to your practice. Thank you so much for taking the time to be on Global Student Voices. You certainly are an example of somebody who's flourishing through that cross-cultural experience. And so thank you for living that example and inspiring. I'm sure there's a bunch of young people out there thinking, yeah, I was thinking about law. Wow, I guess you can do it. Department of Justice, Senate, opening your own practice, you're doing it.
Thank you so much. That's really kind. And anyone who wants advice on any of these things, career advice, I'm always happy to help. So many people have helped me, and it's been invaluable. So just reach out, and good luck to everyone.
All right. Thank you so much, Aparna. Greetings, and give some hugs to those family for us.
Will do.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks for tuning into Global Student Voices. We're committed to bringing you the best advice and to share stories from global students and educators. We need your help. Make sure you subscribe, share, rate, and review our podcast. Follow us on social media for more updates, and we'll see you next time. Until then, stay curious and keep exploring.